Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Inorganic Ventures webinar. My name is Mike Booth. Today I'm going to be your host and sort of lead the panel as we answer your questions today. This is the Ask a Chemist webinar, and we're going to start things off by reviewing some of the resources we have available for chemists on the IV website. Then we're going to take some time to answer your questions. There's been a ton of great questions that have come in already. So before we get started, just want to go over some of the rules that we have or some of the housekeeping items. If you have a question, go ahead and enter that into the Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions that you haven't got a chance to submit already, feel free to enter them there. Our team is going to load in the questions that have been submitted already when you did your registration. So if you've asked your question there, don't worry, it will get added to the list as the webinar goes on this morning. If you don't have a question or you see a question that you like, feel free to use the upvote system. So questions that have the most upvotes will be answered first. We'll do our best to answer all the questions that we have today, and any questions that we don't get a chance to answer today, we will send out sort of our written responses to those questions as well. So definitely use the Q&A box and use that upvote system. The top voted questions will receive a Starbucks gift card today. So, definitely feel free to add any questions you may have. And before we get started with reviewing the resources we have on the Inorganic Ventures website, I do want to give a special thanks to any veterans that are in attendance today as we celebrate Veterans Day. If you are a veteran, please leave a message in the chat, and our team will send you a Starbucks gift card as well. So with all that said, let's go ahead and dive into the Inorganic Ventures website and all of the resources that are available on the website. So if you go to inorganicventures.com, this is what you should see. But essentially what you want to look for is this education tab right here. And once you click on this education tab, there's going to be a wealth of information you can access. It's really one of the best hidden gems for chemistry information on the internet. There is a ton of resources in here. I'm going to go through, I've already broken them out into tabs, but you can sort of select them through just by clicking through these boxes here. Just for today, to speed things up a little bit, I've got them already loaded up. We're going to start off with the ICP operations guide. So this is an excellent guide that goes through, essentially, if you have an ICP instrument, OES or mass spec, gives you a lot of really good background information on how to get it set up, what issues you may run into, how to deal with some sample analysis, some problem elements that might give you trouble. This is actually one of our most popular resources that we have. So popular, in fact, that our team has decided to go in chapter by chapter and record our first podcast series about the ICP operations guide chapter by chapter. So if you're interested in that, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on most major podcast platforms. Here's the Spotify link. We'll drop links in the Zoom meeting if you're interested, but every week our team is going to go through each chapter of the ICP operations guide and talk about it in more detail because there's just a lot of good information in there. After our ICP operations guide, probably our next most popular is our interactive periodic table. So it gives you all the information you would expect from a periodic table, but as you go through and start to click on elements, you'll see more information show up about sampling and handling, chemical compatibility, stability, interferences that might be present, sample prep. It's a really good resource just to go to if you have a sample that contains a certain element. It's a really good resource. It's what our tech support team uses as our sort of go-to whenever we receive a question about a sample that we might not be super familiar with. We always go to the periodic table guide. And if you sort of are requesting more information about sample preparation, I would encourage you to check out our sample preparation guides. These sample preparation guides are very detailed. We have a ton of them already. We're almost actually completed with the series. But if you go through and click on any of the guides that we have, you'll see a wealth of information about sample types. This one is for silicon, how we practice and observe the chemistry at Inorganic Ventures, more information on sampling and handling, and more information about how to get your samples into solution for analysis. Another guide that we have that is also very popular is our trace analysis guide. So doing trace analysis can be difficult. So there is a whole guide written on what goes into the planning, what you need to worry about in terms of contamination, different containers that you should be thinking about to use, goes into some background on digestions and measurement on ICP OES and ICP mass spec. So this is also another excellent resource that you can access. Next up will be our technical forum. So if you want to access the tech forum, you just hover over the education tab, go to tech forum right here. It'll take you to this page. There are several posts on here already with very detailed questions and answers that our staff have gone through and answered for folks. And it has a very robust search function. So that's one of the things that I like to use is just the search functionality. So if I search for ionization energy here, we'll pull up a post, where anything that mentioned ionization energy is, has been listed, and you can go through and read those. But they are broken out into different topics, and there is a ton of information that's available in here as well. So you joined the webinar today, but we also have our back catalog of all the previous webinars that we've put on. You can access that through the technical videos. So you'll see all of our previous webinars, some different technical talks, topics, lots of information that can be found on here. There's hours of content uploaded in our technical videos as well. And last but not least, on the Inorganic Ventures website, we have a ton of just different guides and papers, technical guides that cover things that could be very specific, like mercury, silver, chemical stability and compatibility, understanding error budgets, information about TCT and transpiration, information about traceability. There's just a wealth of information that are in these guides and papers that might not be just, might be the only place they are on the website, but it's definitely a good place to look. They might not fall within a certain topic within one of the ICP operation guide chapters or the trace analysis guide chapters. So just another place to look as well. So that is not all that we offer. However, we do have our yearly ICP conference. So our yearly ICP conference is held in every September at our facility in Virginia. This is the first year that we're actually taking that on the road. So I've put on screen, we'll actually be in Indianapolis and Columbus in early December. We're going to take a lot of the presentations that we do. We don't do as much hands, we're not going to do any hands-on lab stuff on these road shows, essentially. But if you are able to join us next September, we do have hands-on laboratory exercises that the attendees go through. It's a really good conference. We've gotten a lot out of that, and I think our attendees have really enjoyed themselves over the past. We've put it on now for about 10 years. So a really, really good conference if you guys are interested in ICP or having issues with ICP analysis. And lastly, before we dig into your questions here, I will just mention IV Ignite. So we've recently launched IV Ignite. IV Ignite is our virtual training academy that is hosted by Inorganic Ventures. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time. This is IV Ignite. So there is a free trial to sign up. You are able to access with your free trial 2 free courses. But if you decide to go further for a paid membership, we do have a wealth of courses available. This is our catalog here, and IV Ignite is updated on a regular basis. We add more courses monthly. Podcasts come out weekly. There's a ton of stuff that we are loading into IV Ignite. There's dedicated downloadable resources, more forums that you can access. It's a really, really great tool that we're starting to build up. And I think it provides a lot of value to the chemistry community. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to send us a message, but you can access a free trial so you can get in and sort of see what it's all about, for free. All right. So with all of that out of the way, I think now we can go ahead and start getting into the questions. So I'm going to pull up the Q&A box here and filter by most upvotes. To help answer your questions, we have a good team that is honestly right next door to me. So guys, if you want to unmute yourselves and go ahead and do an introduction.
Uh, Hello, everyone. I'm Autumn Phillips. I'm an R&D chemist here at Inorganic Ventures.
I'm Thomas Kozakowski. I am the stock production manager here at Inorganic Ventures.
And I'm Ashley Jones. I'm a technical support chemist.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Let's go ahead and start answering these questions. So first question up is going to be using an ICP OES for analyzing calcium in tallow, and they're having difficulty getting the correct reading.
Yeah, I would think one of the main things here is the high matrix. So you're probably getting some kind of signal enhancement or maybe a signal depression, depending on what kind of elements are present. So I would try doing standard additions methods to try to figure out what's going on with that.
Yeah, another thing with calcium that's really big is just contamination because calcium's everywhere. So making sure that you're checking your blanks for any calcium that may be causing a bias and the results, and then maybe there could be contamination added during your processing of the samples. So you might want to do some method blanks where you do the exact same thing that you would for a normal sample, except you don't add the tallow or the sample to see if there's any calcium being added during the process too.
Yeah, and another thing is some of those OES lines, I'm assuming you're doing OES, yeah. The 393, 396 kind of behave the same. The 422 is a little different. So when you look at which ones are atom lines versus ion lines, they do behave differently. So changing the temperature of your plasma could help.
Definitely. And it looks like we do have a comment that was added to that question from one of our attendees asking the questioner if they are able to ignite the sample and digest the ash. That's a good, I think that would be a good method as well. My sort of 2 cents on this topic would be about sampling. I would be concerned about the sampling of the tallow itself. If there's inhomogeneity present, that might explain why you said the correct reading, but that might explain if you're seeing inconsistent readings from sample to sample, if it's just not homogeneous. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. This came in from Adam, and this was one of the preloaded questions for us. What is a good acid matrix when analyzing for mercury, antimony, tin, and molybdenum?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. Based on this question, I'm going to assume that you're trying to analyze them together in a single solution. So for this one, I would recommend hydrochloric acid. So antimony, tin, and molybdenum are what we call HF elements. So they're gonna need hydrochloric acid stabilization in certain situations. So here, we could get around the use of HF for tin in hydrochloric acid and for molybdenum if there's no HF present in the solution at all. There's also an option for antimony to use tartaric acid, but it's not compatible with mercury. And then depending on your concentration, if you're trying to do mercury and nitric acid, you're going to need glass, which is again not compatible with HF. So I think the easiest way to get these all together would be a hydrochloric matrix, but you are going to have to fluorinate for antimony, tin, and molybdenum. So just make sure you're accounting for that HF stabilization. And if you're seeing stuff falling out, that's probably what's going on. You don't have enough HF in your solution there.
Yeah, another thing for the hydrochloric and tin is, like Ashley was saying, it can be stabilized in hydrochloric, but depending on the age of the sample, over time without the HF in there, it can hydrolyze out of solution. So if you can use HF, I would recommend that, especially if you're going to be using the standard over a longer period of time.
And the good news here is that HF's not going to do anything to the mercury. So
Perfect. All right, thank you guys. Next question up is from Lisa. She says, I have a new injector, new torch, new tubing, fresh standards, and great flow. My calibration curve looks great, and it passed the initial quality check. However, the next quality check fails miserably. Everything is low. I recalibrate and it looks good again. However, the next QC failed. Any ideas on what might be happening?
Yeah, that would really depend on the elements involved in the matrix of your solutions, I would think is the first thing I would check.
Mhm.
Yeah, you shouldn't have issues with tubing stretching, that quickly, so I wouldn't suspect that. There must be something going on with the sample prep of the QC. Maybe it needs a little more acid, to matrix match or something like that.
Mhm.
I would understand this happening for things like mercury that are sticky. If your QC is a lower level, you might be losing it to the plastic walls of your tubing.
Mhm.
But without knowing which elements are involved, that might be a little more difficult to pinpoint. So you might want to send us a follow-up on that. And we'd be able to help you troubleshoot that.
Yeah, I would encourage definitely send us a follow-up. You can send an email to info@inorganicventures.com. Our tech support team, which is Ashley and I, will be happy to take a look, especially if you can send us raw data. I would be concerned about what do your RSDs look like for your calibration standards. Maybe it's an issue with timings, where if you're running a calibration curve sequentially without blanks in the middle, I could see a scenario where maybe there's not enough rinse time, or maybe something's wrong with the timing that you might see in RSDs that you're not seeing in just the intensity itself. So if you could send us data or more information, definitely reach out, info@inorganicventures.com, and we'll take a look at it and get back with you with more specifics. Thank you. All right, next question up. This one came in from one of the preloaded questions. It says, should integration time for target elements always match their internal standard? For example, the integration for mercury and lead match bismuth.
I've never played with integration time, but I would think it's definitely more important if you're running different modes on your mass. I'm assuming this is mass spec based on bismuth being your internal standard. You definitely, like if you're running a collision cell mode and normal mode in the same run, you definitely need those internal standard elements to be run twice, basically. So the ones that are in collision cell mode, make sure that's being read at the same time as the ones without. So you might have double data for your internal standards, but you gotta make sure you use the right ones, because sometimes you get we see washout effects and other things happening, especially with switching valves where we have a sample loop. We might actually run out of sample, so you want to make sure it was run during the correct segment of time. But as far as integration time, I've not really played with that. Have you all?
I think the only thing for integration time, and this for me, it was on OES, so I don't know if it's relevant for this, but it's important to have the integration times set, like if you're looking at like levels of intensity, making sure that they're set optimally for the intensity. So if you have a vastly different intensity for your internal standard versus your sample or your analyte, then that may require some changing. But I wouldn't think that that would be the case, because you'd want your internal standard to be at the same intensity level anyway. So yeah, that's the only thing I would keep in mind for that.
Perfect. Yeah, I would just always recommend whenever you're measuring your internal standard to do it at the same, measurement conditions you are measuring your sample on. I think that I would recommend having them match, but yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Just a reminder, as we answer the questions, feel free to use that upvote functionality in the Q&A box. So you should be able to access that and upvote your favorite questions. We'll make sure that those get priority as we answer them live. All right, next question up is actually a series of questions. So first up, it says,
It just disappeared.
Yep, I found it. It says, lately we've been getting blackening of the injector tip and the torch. They are both quartz. Is that indicative of a problem? And if so, what problem could we have?
I would just say to clean them when you notice that. I mean, that seems like a buildup of something, maybe carbon. So I would just say to soak them whenever you notice that discoloration or a buildup on the torch. And we usually either soak in a nitric, like a 50% nitric, or what we use RBS-25, which is a cleaning solution to surfactant. That one is gonna be really high in sodium though, so you wanna make sure that you rinse it really well. So yeah, I would just say to clean it when you notice that, but I'm not sure. It would depend on what kind of samples you're running. Like if you're running organic, seems like that would be an organic buildup.
I would think that's an organic buildup, so it's probably just carbon, so it's not really a problem. You just eventually need to clean it. And if you're running like oil standards, I think it turns black quite quickly. But the other times I've seen this is with certain precious metals over time, they kind of coat the tip as well. I know gold will make it a little shiny, which is pretty cool to see, but it washes off with water.
Awesome. All right, next question. Sometimes the calibration curves after calibration would not look great with correlation coefficients not as high as I want them to be. And you would expect everything to fail. However, all quality checks pass. Should I proceed with the analysis or should I recalibrate? So I think that's essentially the R-squared value isn't as great as they think it should be, but their quality controls are still passing. Should they go ahead and proceed or recalibrate?
So I think you're having an issue with linearity in this case. I know with our Agilent system, we expanded our calibration curve to be much wider than it used to be. And as we got higher, we discovered a lot of those curves are not actually linear. So I know there's some other questions being asked about how to do detection limits and whatnot. When you set up your methods, you definitely want to figure out what your detection limits are, what your limits of quantification are, what your linear range is. And if you can model it a different way, that's okay. Because I know Agilent's got a good rational method that's based on AA work that does a pretty good job, and we're using it for one of our methods. Works great. But when you get to the extremes, it can cause issues. So then, yeah, you would want to rerun or maybe dilute your sample to be within the more linear range of your calibration set to get more of a pass-fail situation. You'll have more passes that way.
Okay. Perfect. So I know that's a multi-part question. Let's go ahead and jump up. We had something jump up to the top of the list, and then we'll return to this one. This one came in. It says, we started ordering a custom-made standard 10 ppm for 27 metals from IV for ICP OES. When using the standard fresh, we had no problem. All of a sudden, we are noticing a big carryover from silicon not observed at the beginning. We noted this happening on multiple instruments. No issue is observed for the other 26 elements. We buy the working standard in a bulk 20-liter container. When making the standard from individual 10,000 it's 10,000 ppb standards from IV, we see no problem. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I just thought of what this might be. So we package our products in low density polyethylene, which don't have any metals, no silicon in it. We do leach them so you don't see these problems. I know if you're using high density plastic, silicon comes out over time. So it's not coming from our bottle, but I do wonder if it's your sample strategy. Are you using pipetters? Are you using glass pipettes and pipetting from the bottle instead of pouring from the bottle? That could affect silicon over time. So I would look there first, but if that's not the case, it's possible we're having a leaching problem, but we've never seen that before with the bottles that we use. If anything, we would see potentially zinc problems, but again, we leach them pretty aggressively to get everything out of the bottles, and normally they're quite clean when we get them anyway.
Yeah, if it's not a consumables thing, from a quoting standpoint, I would say, or I would ask rather, the HF level in that solution and what your intrasystem looks like, and are you neutralizing or are you using HF resistant system? So 10 ppm is pretty low, but I'm thinking if it's not, consumable stuff like Thomas mentioned, it's possible that the more you're using that solution and the more you're running it through your instrument, if you're not preparing for HF, that you could be leaching more and more silicon from the borosilicate glass. But in that case, you should also see some boron issues. So if you're not analyzing for boron, then you won't see that, or maybe it's just not as pronounced, but yeah, those are two good jumping off points, I think.
Yeah, you could check the blanks too to see if it's an intrasystem thing.
Perfect. All right, thank you. All right, we're gonna go back to this multi-part question here. With part 3, would the status of the argon tank pressure affect the intensity counts? If so, why?
An interesting question. So, the answer is yes. The pressure could affect your intensity counts. Temperature does too. So we've had a lot of debate with our folks who supply our argon, because at one point in time we moved our large doer for the house system outside, and in the summertime we started experiencing issues. So they kept telling us, no, it should be fine, because as long as you have high pressure, you're having the amount of argon, and as long as it's stepping down, it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do. But we've talked to some consultants, some other ICP users. Some of you might even be online with us today. Yeah, the temperature has an effect on that as well. So it can change the efficiency of the argon delivery through. The pressure looks the same, but if the temperature fluctuates, you'll get higher or lower argon counts. And you can see that when you're monitoring argon. You can also see it with nebulizer pressure. Yeah, pressure and temperature matter. So keeping it regulated is your best bet. So we ended up putting a shade system on our outside doer, and it's helped a lot. And well insulating the pipes is helping. This summer we had less issues than we had in the past, like 2 or 3.
Perfect. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next question. And as we answer some of these more questions, I'll return back to that multi-part. Next question up we have is addressing interferences if sample type is complex and inconsistent. The analyte might be greater than 10% and solid, and throughput is high. And Elaine was able to add a little bit more on, because I think this cut off during the preloaded question. So it should be, what are your recommendations for addressing interferences when the sample type is initially unknown and in a high production environment varies greatly from sample to sample, and percent level of rare earths, percent level of any base metals? We use FACT in some cases, which I believe is the Agilent interference method correction, and many alternate wavelengths, but streamlining advice would be helpful.
The best thing, I saw this question before, and the best thing I could come up with is you need to do like true standard additions method, I think. So you're adding a standard with a bunch of elements in it. At multiple levels into your sample. So you need a larger sample size to do this, but you would spike in maybe 1 ppm, 5 ppm, and 10 ppm into that sample to help mitigate some of these interference problems. So you'd be able to prove to yourself that, yes, this is an interference, or no, it's not. This is really the element I'm looking at. It'll help you define that. But as you collect it, like three or four per sample, it may take a little longer to run, but at least you'll be able to dive into that data without having to do reruns. Because I know on an Agilent that's a pain. If you don't select the wavelength, you're not going to be able to look at it. That is one of the downsides of that software, unfortunately.
I would say also, I know that she mentioned her throughput is high, which standard additions is timely.
Yeah,
it takes a lot of time to do that one. I would also recommend perhaps creating an interference table of your own that might be better suited to your sample types. It looks like you are able to sort of parse them out by different types, if it's a rare earth or a base metal. Creating a calibration set for those different sample types and then creating an interference table around that might be beneficial. I know that we have, under the technical videos on our website, there is a previous webinar that Thomas and I did that reviews a in-house method we designed to test it. It sounds very similar. All of our custom products get tested before they ship out, and it's a wide variety. We added an interference table to that method, and it's helped out quite a bit. I don't know, Thomas, if you want to add any to that as well.
No, you're right. But one thing I'll add is that is what FACT is supposed to do.
Yeah.
So being able to trust that would be great. The problem is you gotta build your library with FACT, if I'm not mistaken. So you do need to run single elements at much higher levels than you're used to, so that you can capture things that don't show up in the interference table on the instrument software. So if you run iron, for example, at 1,000 ppm, you're gonna see peaks that are truly iron on places that don't show up in the interference table. And then that'll get loaded into your FACT library and help you out. So I think bolstering, pre-bolstering your library by building that interference table is the way to go for throughput purposes.
Perfect.
It's a little bit of R&D work on the front end, but then you'll be able to run samples and it should work better.
Yeah. All right. Let's skip down. I think we've got a good washout question here from Lisa.
But I
It
know
says
that
we have. What's that?
It moved on me. I'm not looking at the same question.
Says we have mercury carryover issues even with 500 ppb gold in samples, rinse, etc. Mercury releases, running samples, especially kelp LCS. I don't know, maybe that's their sample type. So what do you guys recommend for mercury washout issues?
Lots of things. So one of the things that you could do, it depends on what's in your, what else is in your sample and your matrix. So this isn't an option if you have HF, but anything you can switch to glass rather than plastic is gonna be better, because mercury isn't gonna stick to the glass like it is to the plastic. Switching out your pump tubing is gonna be really good. That's usually the main culprit for sticking issues. Your peristaltic pump tubing. Another thing, you could use hydrochloric for rinsing out the mercury. And we have some other rinse solutions too that we use for hydrochloric acid. Thiourea can help rinse out mercury. Another thing, if you have, this was just something that stuck with me that Paul Gaines had told me at one point, but if you can't find where your carryover is coming from, or mercury staying in your system, the only other thing that I would recommend checking is your waste. So if you have like triethanolamine or anything in your waste that's going to reduce mercury species that's coming into the waste, it can actually travel back up the lines and cause carryover issues. So if you do have any triethanolamine or reducing agent in your waste with that mercury, then I would recommend switching out your waste, because crazily that can happen.
Yeah, you're actually getting mercury vapor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is the gaseous form and it travels back up your drain line. Crazy, but Paul swears that's happened before.
Yeah.
At the old lab. One other thing I would mention is thiourea with HCl does work, but if you want to just use ammonium hydroxide, we've had really good luck with that. When I did some washout studies on mercury, that one actually worked best. Yeah, so switching to a base temporarily just to wash everything out seemed to work pretty well. But yeah, another thing that sticks to, if you've got HF resistant parts, those spray chambers with the coating, mercury sticks to it like crazy. So Autumn mentioned the best way to mitigate that is run on glass.
Perfect. We'll keep on this washout train for one more question. Coming in from John, can you recommend a washout solution for boron by ICP mass spec?
Yeah, I'm gonna stick with the ammonium hydroxide on this one. So we make our standards here at Inorganic Ventures. Most of it's in nitric, but when you look at boron is not in nitric. That one is actually an ammonium hydroxide. It's the only way to get higher levels of boron to be soluble. So I would recommend maybe 1 to 5% ammonium hydroxide. That washes out way more effectively than nitric. Nitric actually makes it stick to the plastic. So you're getting issues with the plastic tubing in your sample delivery. But also if you have an HF resistant spray chamber, it's going to do the same thing that mercury does. When we run TMI for that and we do it on the HF resistant spray chamber, it will stick and not come out until we get it recoated.
Perfect. And if you're interested in any rinse solutions or have any questions about what rinse to use, feel free to contact us again, info@inorganicventures.com. I know Autumn just mentioned we've been working a lot with the cannabis industry lately to develop a thiourea HCl washout mix. It's been working really well for them. So, feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions. We'll be more than happy to help. All right, let's talk about copper. So this was a preloaded question that came in from Joseph. Copper peak seems to shift from the blank to the high calibration. The peak shifts until about 12 to 15 ppb copper, then stabilizes. Any ideas?
Yeah, I know what this is. I've done a lot of trace metals analysis over the years, many years. I am 99% sure you're using OES and looking at the 324 line. So there is, if you look at a blank of that without copper, there is a peak. It's not copper. I think it's hydroxide. It does show up in one of those lines of libraries. I think it's on Agilent as OH as the interference. So you will always see it, and it will always be at the same level. So when you see stuff like that, where it's in your blanks, it's in your standards, it's in everything, it's an interference in your matrix, or it could be air. So sometimes some of these are carbon, sometimes that's argon. In this case, that little peak that you're seeing is always there, and it looks like it's 12 to 15 copper. It's not copper at all. So when you see your copper signal rise over time, the peak isn't shifting. It's just landing on the shoulder of that interference peak. So I tend to use 327 for copper, and I think there's a 221 that don't have that little peak on it. And we have better luck with that. But your peak's not actually shifting, it's just landing on another one that's always there.
Perfect. Thank you, Thomas. Excellent tip. All right, let's move on to our next question. What is the most suitable method for determining the method detection limit in ICP OES by calibration curve or by spiking study by the EPA method? So what would you guys recommend for determining a method detection limit, a calibration curve or spike recovery? I'll throw in my 2 cents.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Autumn.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, for me, it would depend on what kind of method you're trying to run. If you're trying to run calibration, I would determine your detection limit by calibration. And so that's what we normally use for like our multi-element methods, is we would do a calibration curve for that specific element at whatever range we're trying to look at it. And like Thomas said, determine the method detection limit, the linear range of that element, and any interferences that are going to be brought by other elements in your calibration standard. And it would just be like a 3 standard deviation of the blank divided by the slope of the calibration curve.
Yeah, I was going to say I would recommend starting off with a calibration curve to determine it, and then go back and test it with a spiking study. So if you set your method detection limit at 5 ppb, then I would do a quick spike recovery just to make sure that you can actually achieve that. That way you sort of get the speed of the calibration, and then once you sort of set that, you get the confirmation by the spiking study. That would be my 2 cents on that one. All right. Let's go back up to this multi-part question. Next part on that one was, what is the initial calibration verification used for? So that essentially is using a second source. What is the purpose of adding internal standard into the system flow? It has yttrium, and what is its function? So essentially, why do people run a second source after their calibration? And then why do people add an internal standard?
Yeah, the ICV, you're making sure your calibration curve was built properly. So this is a great way to check if you have a linearity problem. That's the main thing I would use it for, but it's also make sure your calibration didn't screw up, because I mean, you can have a random bubble go into your system while you're running a standard, and you're like, this calibration curve looks terrible. If it's only for one element, you'll know that it could be like a sticky washout issue. If it's all your elements, you know that your sample didn't run properly. If you see argon went crazy, your nebulizer might have gotten clogged. It helps check, that helps check the validity of your calibration curve. Now, the internal standard is to go and mitigate matrix problems and argon problems. You probably use it more than I have.
Yeah, I think part of that was asking the purpose of running, I think they're asking about running the internal standard in line. So rather than spiking in your internal standard, you're running it, you have a separate line in your system for the internal standard. That is recommended to make sure that the exact same amount is being added to each and every sample and standard that you're running. To make sure that the dilution factor is the same, so it's not gonna affect the intensity level of your analytes. But yeah, like Thomas said, it's just accounting for matrix effects. So if you see something happen with your internal standard where the intensity is reduced in your samples, you can apply that same factor to the analytes, because whether it's suppression or whatever the case may be. Yeah, and so yttrium is probably the most common for OES, the most common internal standard. But you want to make sure that yttrium is not in your samples, is the main thing.
And it's usually not.
Yeah, it's usually not.
Yeah.
But it was actually in the hemp samples that we did a study on recently. So we use scandium rather than yttrium. So yeah, just make sure that it's not in your samples already, because that can throw off your whole analysis.
But yeah, it definitely does a good job when you can't guarantee matrix matching standards versus samples. So that'll help mitigate that difference, because the difference does matter. You'll see a bias in anything that you run. Even a difference between 1% and 5% nitric can be a big difference, especially on mass spec. We've definitely seen that.
Thank you, guys. Well, we are running up against the 11:15 time, which is when this was scheduled to end. Our team is going to stay on through 11:30. So, but if you need to jump off, feel free to jump off. We will make sure to send out a recording of this to everyone who registered. And in the next 15 minutes, if we don't get to answer, we probably won't get to answer all 19 remaining questions. But we will type up responses and get those sent out to you guys as well. So let's go ahead and keep answering some questions here. Next one up, let's do the one from David. It was preloaded in. It says, I analyze an organic matrix for group 1A, 2A, first row transitions, various other metals, including aluminum, silicon, phosphorus, and sulfur. What's the best acid to use for digestion?
I don't have that list in front of me to know what those elements are. Is the precious metals one or the ones that are not? 1A has mercury, right?
1A, wait, are we talking about 1A, like the first, like the alkali metals? I think we are.
Oh, maybe we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So normally, I mean, for an
Obviously.
organic matrix, usually nitric is a good acid to use for the digestion. For silicon, since you are interested in that, you are gonna have to add some HF to get the silicon to digest. The only other thing that I noticed in there that may be an issue is aluminum. If it's metallic aluminum, because the nitric is gonna make an oxide layer, and then it won't allow it to digest. But I think in an organic matrix, that nitric is probably your best option with some HF for the silicon.
Yeah, and I would actively encourage David to check out the sample preparation guides that we reviewed on the website. For each element, you should be able to go in. There is a section that's specific for organic matrices for each element. So that's it's a wealth of information on sample prep there as well. All right. Okay, let's go next one here. Recommendations for setting up instrument detection limits and method detection limits on ICP OES, and that was from Craig.
Yeah, we're actually currently doing this on a brand new instrument we have. I would recommend running single element standards for every element you're going to check and do a pretty wide calibration range. So right now we're running, I think for a majority of our elements, we're doing like 1, 10, 50, 100, and then we go all the way to 1,000 ppm, just to see what its capabilities are. But for the detection limit calculation, obviously we're going to use the blank versus the low standard that we end up running. So sometimes it's as low as 0.1. Just do that for every single. It'll help you build your lines library as well for interferences. So you're really killing two birds with one stone, but it's well worth the effort on the front end, so that you can know what your capabilities are. But yeah, definitely set those calibration curves up and run multiple levels, low and high.
Perfect. All right, let's return back up to this multi-part question. I think this is a good one. They're asking, what do we accomplish by routine daily realignment for mercury and manganese? I know somehow they help with positioning of the torch, but how does that help really? So I think this might be more related to, I'm not sure that might be specific to a specific instrument make and model. But I know that we do daily checks on all of our instruments to check intensities and RSDs just to make sure that we've got a good performance for the day before we set up, a big important run and we find out, once we've exported our data that the instrument wasn't performing very well. So that would probably be my reasoning as to why there's a daily check for mercury and manganese. Thoughts from the group?
Yeah, so one of our older instruments, I believe it was the Varian, we would do a manganese check, but it was used to center the torch. So that was just really optimizing the intensities, but there's also wavelength calibration. So it's possible that that's being used in this case as well. It is important that you have wavelength calibrations done routinely, because you build templates on your instrument software and you kind of basically hard code wavelength positions to your template. And if your optics drift over time, all of a sudden you have to recenter a lot of peaks. And I mean, one of our methods has 400 lines. That takes a lot of time to recenter, when really we could have done a wavelength calibration and those peaks get recentered to the original template we made. So that's really, it's really to save you a lot of time, because the software is only as smart as the inputs that go into it. And drift happens. It's usually because of temperature in your optics chamber, I think. More so than anything else.
Yeah, it's also helpful for monitoring when something is going out. Like if you keep a log of everything, like we keep maintenance logs on all of our instruments, and you see slowly the intensity somewhere is going down, then depending on your instrument, you may need to replace a part, like a chip or something, in your optics system. But yeah, it shows you if you see like here and on this day or this week, this started to go down, then you can help diagnose the issues before they become debilitating to your entire instrument.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that answers their next couple questions as well. That wavelength calibration, we recommend it should be done at least once a week. Again, like Thomas mentioned, make sure those peaks are centered. And then the last part of this person's question, I think, got cut off. But they say they're a very busy lab, so they're running ICP all day. I'm feeling it's probably a question related to drift. I would just say if you're doing a calibration method, it's probably a good idea to recalibrate about every 20 samples or so, just to, because drift happens, it's going to happen. It has a possibility to throw off your results. So definitely recalibrate frequently, but do that wavelength calibration for your instrument at least weekly.
And some of the newer softwares actually use drift lines to autocorrect. So if you enable that, it'll actually always look at carbon lines, some argon lines that are always there because it's in the air. And it'll recalibrate the whole optics system based on how those drift, because in theory, they all drift at the same rate.
Yeah.
Because it's really just an off-centering of your CCD detectors.
I was just gonna say too, since I don't know what that question was at the end, but if it was about swapping anything, definitely swap your tubing every day if you're running the instruments all day. That peristaltic pump tubing. And check it regularly depending on the type of samples that you're running too, because it could be getting dirty sooner even than just swapping it out daily if you're running really concentrated samples.
They'll run up cracking too over time, so if you leave it clamped or you run some really high acids through, they'll start cracking, letting air in, and when you get air into that sample line, all kinds of things can happen, and your RSDs go through the roof and you're troubleshooting why.
Yeah. All right, next question up. This is from Jessica. When analyzing used lubricating oils in an ICP OES, why can there be variation in the recovery of yttrium internal standard?
Yeah, this is one of the ones I looked at beforehand, and I was wrapping my brain around this one. On OES, I'm really not sure.
I think
I was thinking about this from a mass spec perspective, and chloride could be an issue, but I just realized this is OES.
It could be, the transport efficiency of your sample, if you have different viscosity of the samples versus your calibration or your calibration standards. So yeah, you could just be having a matrix issue because the matrix is different.
And I guess from sample to sample, if it's not homogeneous, you would see larger issues.
Yeah,
That makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think that yeah, essentially if there's any difference in especially the viscosity, you're going to see a huge difference in that nebulization efficiency. That could be it. Could also be these are used oils, so it's hard to tell, from sample to sample what's in there. It might be a matrix of effect that is present in one sample that's not present in the other. Yeah, but if you're using an internal standard, that is the reason why you're using it, to correct for those differences. So definitely look out for those issues.
I wonder if you could minimize the issue by chilling your spray chamber. That might be a good route to go. If your spray chamber is not chilled, you're at the mercy of your environment. So oils are more susceptible to changes in temperature. So that would be a way to control it.
And it's probably not like a prep issue, but just again, if you aren't using a inline internal standard, that might help you with consistency of the internal standard as well, rather than spiking it into everything, just to make sure you eliminate the any mistakes that could happen from spiking or doing your dilution correction incorrectly.
Awesome. All right. Well, we've probably got enough time for 1 to 2 more questions. So I'm trying to go through here to see what people might be interested in. Let's take one from Adriana. What instrument parameters would you focus on when trying to lower your limit of detection?
That was a hard one. I wasn't sure.
That is a hard one, but I wanted to throw that over to Autumn to sort of talk about a recent project that she's worked on.
Yeah, so one of the projects I worked on recently was improving detection limits, looking at really, really low levels of some heavy metals. So what I did was I went through and optimized the system like by individual parameter. So the nebulizer flow rate, you can just change that and see if you can optimize for whatever analyte you're trying to look at or get lower detection limits from. You can look at this nebulizer flow rate versus a higher or lower. A lower is usually going to increase your intensity, but it's also going to increase the background. So it's a balance. And then also your RF power. You increase the RF power, that increases your intensities, but also your background. And also the flow rate of the sample through the system. So if you increase the pump speed, you'll get more sample flowing through. You could also look at a different type of nebulizer intersystem setup where you're allowing more sample to flow through to increase your intensities. But again, it's kind of a balance of background versus your signal, because when you increase the intensity, of your analyte, your peak. You're usually also gonna be increasing the background. So I would recommend just going through one by one and adjusting those parameters. RF power, nebulizer flow rate, and pump speed to see where you're maximizing your counts per concentration of the analyte.
Definitely. Awesome. Thank you.
And if you could magically concentrate your sample, that would help. I know that is actually a strategy that the acid industry does, because they have insanely low detection limits on acids. And it's because they have a concentrate, like they concentrate the sample and then get detection limits based on that. So it's like doing the opposite of a dilution factor. So that's if that's possible, you could go that route as well.
Yeah. And if you normally are looking radially at the analytes and your instrument is capable of looking at axial and radial, you'll get higher counts on axial. But again, your background's gonna increase too, so
Yeah.
just a balance of all of that.
All right. Well, we've got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to toss out an easy one here to our group before we finish up. Just need to find it again. Here we go from Michael. Are the Inorganic Ventures ICP mass spec standards made at natural isotopic ratios? And he throws out an example for a europium standard. Guys, do we use natural abundance or purified?
Everything's natural abundance except for uranium. Uranium is depleted for the radioactive elements, so that's a majority. It's got artificially high 238, and then of course we do have 6 lithium. So you look at the certificate; it'll tell you what the abundances are of those isotopes. So everything except lithium, 6 lithium specifically, and then the uranium. I think everything's natural.
Mhm.
And if you have any question, make sure to check your product certificate of analysis. If it is not natural abundance, it should be listed. I believe that's going to be section 4 of your C of A paperwork. All right. So we did not get a chance to answer all the questions. There are still lots of questions remaining. Our team is going to go through and provide these responses in writing to all of these questions. So you will have them. It just will probably be next week before we get a chance to send them out. So I do want to thank everyone for attending, and we will catch you on the next webinar. I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend. Thanks all.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.